The last part of this chapter deals with design, graphic, industrial, interior, and landscape. We've hit on this a little bit earlier, obviously with applied arts, and so this is a little bit of a more in-depth look at design. Graphic design is what we'll start with, and graphic design, I'd say, is an up-and-coming type of art making, more and more so because of our relationship to advertising in media in general. And so, just in the time that I've been alive, it's become more and more important to consider what graphic design is and what it does. And it can be anything from movie posters to online ads. There's just a variety of things that graphic designers can create. One example I have for you here is the famous I Love New York poster that was redesigned actually after the 9/11 attacks to have this little sort of smudge on the heart to indicate the tragedy that had occurred and New York's reaction to it through this type of advertising imagery. So again, someone like Glazer would create something that can be mass produced, can be used for a variety of different reasons. So graphic design, we see it in our lives all the time. Industrial design is another thing as well I think we see in our lives all the time and we don't think much about. And we can trace its roots to the Bauhaus School in Germany and Walter Gropius. And Gropius was a modernist, just like Mies van der Rohe and Philip Johnson and some of these other people I've spoken to you about in the architecture lecture. And he founded the Bauhaus School to conceive of how pretty much every object in our life can be designed to be more functional. If you remember that phrase, right, form follows function, these guys believe that too. So in the Bauhaus, they designed all kinds of different things, from things like graphic design imagery, all the way down to things like the chairs you sit in. And so wherever you are right now, consider the chair you're in, what you're sitting in. If you're not sitting, look around and find something to consider, like a chair or table. And think about how it's designed and how an industrial designer considered the look of the chair, the function of the chair, the fabric, the color, and how it could be mass produced at the end of the day. So again, these are objects we see around us all the time, but I think sometimes we don't really consider them as art. But they are. Something as simple as a clock, for instance. By the way, when this clock was designed, it was considered shocking because there were no numbers on it. Just the little sort of lines to indicate the time. So this was considered quite shocking as a design idea. Today, I'm often shocked by how many of my students can't read a clock like this at all because they're so used to having a phone in their pocket that they can look at. So they're mystified by what this clock is trying to tell them, and they're mystified by phrases like quarter after, quarter to, half past, because they don't think of time that way. So it just shows you how design has to keep updating itself for the population that's encountering, because again, a traditional clock like this may not make sense to one of my 20-year-old students. It's not how they conceive of the design working for them. So good industrial designers think about the audience, right, for their products as well. Interior design around you all the time as well. It's the spaces that you live in. And you can look at something like Horta's Tassel House. I've shown you this one before. And think about how this space was designed. I'd mentioned it was Art Nouveau. And so there's this curving use of organic shapes and such. But you can also look at something like a mid-century modern showroom and consider how these are two different ways to design space, and think about interior and how it should work. And that leads us to the last type of design, which is landscape. And I think of all kinds of different outdoor spaces, from the earliest spaces like the Hanging Gardens of Babylon to the Palace of Versailles, let's say, in France, that was created by Louis XIV during the French Baroque era. And how, landscape designers are considering the overall impact of your outdoor spaces and how you'd relate to them. Louis XIV loved glamour and pageantry, these giant fountains, right? He adored the idea of, things that were celebrating his grandeur and his position as king. And we'll talk about him a little bit more when we get to the French Baroque chapter.